if we're going to have the conversation about what's next for John Jones, I'm saying, Francis, we can't not mention John Jones. Speaking of John, he tweeted about this. Let's check it out over here from Boney. What an amazing job Francis did tonight. Displayed a complete MMA game. Great kicks, great takedowns. It feels good to see him shine. Wow. Congratulations, champ. I see you.
Why does he spell Boney wrong?
Period. End quote. What do you think the Boney nickname references? Because I never really got why he names himself Boney.
Well, he's John Bones Jones.
No, is that it? Is it just instead of Bones, it's Boney?
I don't quite get why it's Boney.
Or is he a big like Boney acai fan? Or whatever.
Hey, maybe it's maybe they're just paying him for the
I mean, the one thing John didn't say in there is, "I'd love to fight you one day."
Right, that's what you say to a guy when you're wishing him bon voyage.
Yes, have Don call Dana and Hunter.
I was going to say that. I actually feel like what John said there was, to a degree,
genuine,
heartfelt.
Yeah.
Yes, I absolutely think that.
John Jones can be a real man in person, too.
Fair enough. However, I also feel like that was him being like, we're never fucking fighting.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Like, that was how I took that.
So when we talk about what's next, let's get over that hump first. Does the result of this change anything in the public pressure, court of public opinion, the business futures of TKO Global, or TKO Group? Are we more likely in the TKO Group era to see something in the past was impossible, a UFC crossover with another promotion? Does this event in a result change any of that, or should we put this to bed and figure out what free agent heavyweight out there is going to be next for Francis?
I don't think that there is going to be a free agent at heavyweight, although one never knows. I do want to point out something. Like, people are giving Saudi Arabia a lot of credit for making fights happen. And to be clear, they are entitled to a fair amount of credit. Whatever else one wants to say about them, who is putting up money to make many of these fights, both on MMA, but more so certainly on the boxing side possible? It is definitely the Saudis. We are going to get a test of their limit. We're gonna find out what their upper bound limit is, because they've got all the money in the world to make John Jones or even Tom Aspinall or whoever ends up having it. Again, whoever ends up that being versus Francis. You know Francis would be willing. You certainly know Turkey probably wants it. You certainly know he's got the resources to make it happen. What would be the only obstacle, Brian Campbell, that could potentially get in the way if you have PFL enthusiasm, ESPN Plus support, Turkey's unlimited money, as well as his interest? What would be the only potential factor holding that up?
I'll give you two initials for two words, and they are UF.
Yes.
Uncle Fester.
I see
yes, thank
I see you. So if the UFC doesn't want to co-promote, even under these circumstances, there is literally nothing short of the force of law that could ever make them.
Don't go past that. If that ever did happen, because look, remember, Turkey was talking about getting Ariel and Dana together, the ultimate breaking of bread. If they could get Don Davis and Peter and Murray, or whatever the guy's name is, and Dana and all of them, and Ari Emanuel at the table, and they were just like, look, we're going to put so much money in your company's pocket. This is going to be the biggest MMA event of all time. This is going to be Fedor versus Crow Cop, but in UFC form. Would it have to be a UFC pay-per-view airing on whatever UFC network it is at the time?
Dude.
And would PFL do that as long as he was able to come in with the PFL belt around him as PFL heavyweight champion?
I think PFL would give up literally everything, including that.
Just to get the money and exposure from it?
And including even the ability for Francis to win the heavyweight title. So what Pride used to do at times was they would have like Takanori Gomi as their lightweight champion, and he would fight for another person with the title. Then they just book him later in a fight, and he could win or lose it. And in fact, one time he did lose it, but they never made the fight a title contest. So he never lost the belt, even though he got fucking submitted by Marcus Aurelio. I guarantee you they would give up that and everything else just to make that possible on a UFC broadcast.
See, if UFC's ESPN deal wasn't coming up soon, I would think that maybe we should start talking about this, because if it was all under the same network anyway and it didn't matter, does the networks change it at all? Or you're saying it doesn't matter, it's going to be on UFC pay-per-view if it ever would happen?
Yes.
I know Dana would never want to, under all the reasons we know. Does Ari Emanuel and others at that level with TKO trump him? Could they talk him into that?
Again, we're going to get the limits of what Turkey's willing to do to make big fights happen.
Okay, interesting.
If he can't make it happen as basically the guy with an ATM card to a petrol state, I don't know that it's possible.
All right, if we're going to talk about possible Francis next opponents in the Smart Cage, we can have the same debate we did when he signed with them in 2023 and go, Junior Dos Santos, who, by the way, took the Game Bread contract over this possibility. Derek Lewis, who re-signed with UFC. So it's slim pickings. But what about this? What about the same thing that we're trying to back Dana into a corner to do? Can we do that with Shatri's guy, Anatoly Malakin,
Yes.
one of the best heavyweights in the world?
Yep.
Do you think that's something that could relatively easily happen so that when we're going like, maybe Francis does come back next against a washed X name and mops the floor with him to keep the money going for PFL. But is that a fight that can be built to that you think would be worth it? Because I know Malakin's not a household name, but hardcore guys know that this guy's one of the biggest badasses in the world. Can you make that fight?
And Francis has beaten better guys, has faced better guys, has much better punching power, but Malakin's smaller, quicker, and can wrestle. That's an interesting fight.
Would you call Malakin gas station Fedor? But not as a
he's a little bit better than that.
But not as an insult, as a compliment?
Yeah, Brian Campbell gas station Fedor. Okay. Maybe, you know what I mean?
So you could still eat there.
Yeah, it'd be like a Wawa where you could definitely still get like a lot of cool things. I think that fight can be made and should be made. And I realize it's delicate. How do you do it where everyone can benefit, even in the event that your guy loses? There are complications related to that, but I don't think it's all that complicated in terms of finding some kind of crossover deal that is mutually beneficial, especially as one moves to a more Muay Thai model out of Thailand. They've cut their costs. They've moved their financial headquarters. They're not in MMA as much as they used to be. Brian Campbell won't stop smirking.
Because I have an idea that I know you'll shoot down, but I love the idea.
Okay.
So imagine if 42-year-old Cain Velasquez gets sentenced for jail in this upcoming trial, and then he's just like, F it. Before I go in, one more time.
He already lost to Francis.
I know, but the knee fell apart and it wasn't a real fight.
Yeah.
Is he still deep
under
UFC?
He's more situated now.
I'm just trying to think what's the biggest name you could get that's not with the UFC right now. But but actually he still is tied to the UFC, probably contractually.
I would imagine he is, or I
okay,
doubt.
so that fight is a non-starter too.
Yeah.
What's realistic then? What's the next option? Is it Anti-Delia? What is it?
I think that if they can't get Malakin, and even if they can't get Malakin, that's not going to sell well on pay-per-view, although that would be a very good fight.
Who's a somewhat recently retired, still in their early 40s, still would have a marketable shot?
I think we need to just look at this reality and be like, the reason why Francis can't get fights is not because the PFL is not making it worth the while of a potential challenger. It's because the contracts are so long inside the UFC. And by the way, other promotions play these games too, but the reality is we're talking about the possible contenders he could face. They are all with the UFC, and those contracts are extended and so long that there's not enough of a rotation to get them out. And even when there is, they find ways to kind of cleverly undercut it. He has to fight Deontay Wilder. I don't know who else he could fight.
He's not going to fight Deontay Wilder.
I saw.
Oh, you mean in boxing?
In boxing. Oh,
but the PFL won't get money in that unless they do a hybrid fight.
I don't know what option PFL has.
I'm going to give you two of them.
I'm
going to give you two of them and see if they're acceptable. Okay. One is the recently knocked out Ryan Bader. Let's say he gets a tune-up.
No,
okay,
absolutely not.
Two is former Bellator light heavyweight champion who's now a heavyweight, Vadim Nemkov.
Vadim Nemkov is a decent name you could go to. Yes, that is somebody. That's not going to sell a dime on pay-per-view. But is that a legitimate fight? Yes.
Yeah, MMA fans would not shit on that, right? They'd be like, okay, let's see.
Well, yes, they would. They would say Nemkov is not quality, blah, blah, blah. But he is quality. He is quite good. That's a tough fight.
Are there any other large light heavyweights that would fit this bill?
If I was Johnny Walker, why are you fighting in the UFC? Like, if you're going to fight in the UFC and you want to be a champion, you need to be like considerably better than your peers, right? And he's not that. But he is, dude, he's got the donk. He's just gyrating his crotch at all times, kind of bit going on. He could make a splash outside the UFC, I think, much better than he could inside. It's time for him to realize what his true future is.
This is also also a non-starter due to contracts. But do you think Poatan would have the balls to step in there at heavyweight against him?
I think Poatan would have the balls to step in there against Thanos if you gave him an opportunity. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And this is what I mean. Like, Francis, if he had enough contenders, could be doing some really, really interesting things in MMA. But the reality with the PFL is they have tried to feather a nest for a potential contender. Remember, not just $1, but $2 million to anyone who faces Francis. But they can't get out of their contracts. So there you go.
If he hadn't tragically passed, would Rumble Johnson be in this mix?
He would be in this mix, yes.